Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 68 of ZK Live. Tonight, we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, and an amazing human being. His name is John Lahey. He is the president of Fine Paints of Europe.
Mr. Lahey.
Mr. Zach, how are we?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. I'm glad I didn't screw this up for you yet.
We're good. We did our dry run. Nothing can stop us now.
Absolutely not. Good. Good, good.
Well, welcome. For anyone who doesn't know you, this is John Lahey, the president of Fine Paints of Europe. Why don't we just start with what is Fine Paints of Europe and what is Dutch paint and what makes it special?
So Fine Paints of Europe, we are not the manufacturer. We're the importer distributor of a company in the Netherlands called Viginal. And so we rebranded it. We don't call it Viginal for obvious reasons. So we own the brand Fine Paints of Europe for North America. So we're the exclusive importer and distributor for Fine Paints of Europe for North America. And importing the finest paints available anywhere in the world to a demanding clientele, and providing it to the best independent retailers in the country. And then that's basically in a nutshell, who Fine Paints of Europe is, right? So yeah, importer distributor. So Greenwich Importers imports Heineken beer, right? Fine Paints of Europe imports Viginal paint, rebranded, repackaged for our market under the label Fine Paints of Europe.
And why paint from Holland then?
Why paint from Holland? Well, if you think about it, you can think about any possible consumable product in the world, and you can think of the mecca of that thing, right? If I said to you, Zach, I want you to go out and find, the mecca for wristwatches, you're going to go to Switzerland. If I said to you, I want you to go find the best chocolate in the world, I know you're an advocate, you're probably going to go to Belgium. If I said to you that you're going to get the finest cigar in the world, you're going to go to Cuba. And you can keep going on down that rabbit hole. But what's known in our industry, without a doubt, is the Netherlands is the mecca of paint technology, and just, the best paint in the world. You have this little country the size of Connecticut and has north of 100 different paint manufacturers in it, right? 100 different paint manufacturers, right? So
Crazy.
They are known in the world of paint manufacturing as the Dutch make the best paint in the world. I mean, every advancement that there's been in our world has come from the Netherlands, right? They the first people to take lead out of paint, the first people to put paint in a can, the first people to create product-specific tinting, like this tinting system that Fine Paints of Europe has. The first people to create water thinnable alkyds are Eco, right? Eco is over 40 years old, and here in the United States, we have other manufacturers that are just kind of, wrapping their hands around and getting it now, right? And trying to dial it in, and keep changing it and tweaking it and making it better and making improvements. That product for us, is, we have not had it for 40 years, but Viginal has been making it for over 40 years. And now it's just really starting to explode. Like Eco is a product that you guys use all the time, because you're getting oil-like results without using all the drawbacks of using an oil.
Yeah.
So that is the mecca. That is where all the best paint in the world comes from. The number one university in the world for paint making technology is the University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. So that's like the MIT or the Harvard of how to make paint. It's, they're just a wonderful partner, and we couldn't be happier with our manufacturer over there.
That's awesome. I just want to get this out of the way for everybody, and then we can get back to this. At the end of this, when John is done, I'm happy to answer technical questions on applying the paint, but I've gotten lots of those and people are already asking them in the comments. We're going to talk about the paint and the company and all the other things first. So
let me guess how to thin it.
How do we thin it? What should I apply it with? What tip size? What PSI? All those questions. Let's save those. How did Fine Paints of Europe, the importer, begin? It didn't start as Fine Paints of Europe, right?
It did.
Did, and then the name of the can was different.
That's correct. So in the very beginning, we started out with a much smaller manufacturer. In the very, very beginning, it was called Hasco, which stood for the Herman A. Schroeder Company. My father thought it was much too of a like commercial name, right? He didn't love the name Hasco, and nobody did. And in the infancy stages, he wanted to change it, as early as possible. And then out of Hasco, he just started calling it Schroeder. So even today, I still get people asking, is Schroeder still around, or is this the new Schroeder? And no, Schroeder is no longer around. Unfortunately, it was, it was owned by a great gentleman by the name of Mr. Schroeder. I call him Mr. Schroeder, and he had no heirs. It was a struggling paint company. None of his children wanted to take over a struggling paint manufacturer in the Netherlands. It had a horrible tinning system. The product was fine itself, but later on he sold it to two gentlemen that quickly bled it of cash, stuck it in their pockets, and ruined the brand. And at the time, my father was working with our rep who took care of us, a great guy, and told him what was going on and said, you really need to find another supplier, and led us in the direction of Viginal. Viginal is a fairly large company in the Netherlands, but what really drew my father to them is their tinning system, and also the fact that it's also family owned, operated. Last year or the year before last, they actually received their royal status, meaning that they're now north of 100 years old company, privately owned. So when the Dutch think about paint, it's not, 5 or 10 years, it's literally 20 and 30 and 40 years down the road. And that's what really put my father at ease with this next manufacturer.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so, it's a wonderful outfit. They've got the best tinning system in the world, and they're always looking out for what's coming up next. Obviously, everything that the new CEO, Marlies van Via, which is interestingly enough, the only woman in the world running a paint company, which is kind of ridiculous because women are obviously a huge portion of paint sales, whether it's speccing, applying, whatever. Just a fantastic company to work with and be partnered with. So it's been wonderful.
And women are badass. So I'm glad to hear that.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, me too. All right, so it started as Hasco, which, yes, that doesn't sound nearly as nice as Fine Paints of Europe when we say it out loud.
Right.
And when you were originally importing it, it was just oil. How did you go from oil to water-based as well?
So this is probably mid-90s, and people would constantly, we'd be selling, a decent amount of paint. We didn't have, anywhere close to the amount of dealers that we had now. A large percentage of our paint was sold direct, which we still do today. But, at the time I was working the phones, I was doing technical support. I was trying to, do whatever I can to help find paints. But people were always constantly asking for, do you have latex or acrylic based paints for the wall? And, my father fought it. He's like, this is an oil-based house, and not, not that he didn't want to explore it, but you know, it was just something maybe we weren't ready to take on. It was a big responsibility, huge time, money investment, but eventually we had to do it. We had to swallow the bullet, and thank God we did. And then at that time, we started bringing in a product called Obolux, Obolux. It was basically a matte finish, but phenomenal product. Phenomenal product. People absolutely loved it. And then we started selling a lot more paint because people are obviously much more comfortable using acrylic-based paints on walls just because of the odor factor, right? Mom's pregnant, Johnny's got asthma. I don't want that nasty odor. And, you know, only doing trim and oil and then acrylic on the walls, you know, it does keep the odor down, right? I mean, putting oil everywhere, oil matte finish, I mean, it smells, right?
Yeah.
And it really helped us out tremendously. And then I think he saw the handwriting on the wall and said, all right, we have to start going in this direction. And so that was the beginning of the Fine Paints of Europe water-based thing.
So it went from oil enamels to water-based wall paints.
Yeah.
When did Eco come in then? The alkyd acrylic enamel, the water.
Now that was still that was still Schroeder at the time. So we've been with Viginal for probably 13 or 14, probably pushing 15 years now. So we switched manufacturers, which was not a lot of fun because we had, you know, dealers all over the country that was still selling Schroeder paint. So me and another guy literally had to go with a different tinting system. Now we went from one tint wheel, now we have two. So we had to go to all these dealers, recall all of that paint, and then send out the new brand, the new manufacturer, set up all new tinting equipment to all of our dealers all over the country. Not a lot of fun. You know, it was an awful year of my life, but you know, we got it done, and you know, onward and upward. So that was the transition from Schroeder to Fine Paints and Viginal.
Okay, and what makes Eco then? What is it that makes Eco special? What can you tell us about that tinting system?
Right. So the tinting system, basically, the rest of the industry here and abroad uses what is called UTCs. UTC stands for Universal Tinting Colorants, right? What's universal about them? You can have one tint wheel, and you can put it into oil-based paint, and you can put into latex paint, and it both kind of works, right? But you can only add about 6% colorant to a base before it starts to float. It doesn't dry. It doesn't cover very well. It doesn't do anything that you really want it to do well. Okay. Fine Paints of Europe tinting system is very different. So we have two tint machines at every retailer. So you're putting acrylic-based pigments into acrylic-based paint, oil-based pigment into oil-based paint. Now, when you do that, the only downside is you need two tint machines physically in the store, but the upside is exponential, right? So you have much better tinting accuracy, saturation of color, and actually what a lot of people don't realize is it's the conjunction of the colorants themselves and our paints that make them better. It's not just the quality of the paint itself, it's actually also the addition of those colorants. So every single can that ZK buys from Harry Adler will cover as if it was a factory-made product. Now think about that, what that does for the high-end painter. So every day you're looking at colors where if you weren't using fine paints, it would be 3, 4, sometimes 5 coats to cover with probably a tinted primer, right? Now you can use a product that is better saturation of color, the same exact color that you want, but it's going to cover 3 or 4 times better than anybody else's product, right? Now think about what that does to the labor cost, right? People are always so hung up on the can of paint, but as you and I both know, 85 to 99.9% of the cost of painting isn't John Lahey,
No.
It's Zach Kenney, baby, right?
Yeah.
So if you can slash that, now Fine Paints of Europe is on par with most other coatings in the market. right? And at the same time, you're getting a superior can of paint.
So with for up until very recently, the oil primer was fully tintable in all colors. You had a TR base, what you guys call it, the base that can be tinted to any color.
Yeah.
Was the TR base always there with the oil primer?
Yes, always. It's kind of strange that the one paint company in the world that doesn't need a tinted oil-based primer is the one company that has it, right? To date, that is still my biggest selling SKU. It's not shiny paint. It's not Holland Brilliant. It is our oil-based primer. So we have exceedingly high-end painters that use it, and then we have not so high-end painters that use it, and then we have everything in between, and then we have a lot of OEMs, people that make stuff that need it primed, window and door manufacturers, shutter manufacturers, kitchen cabinet manufacturers, use it, because the one thing that gives you is now you have a tintable primer to whatever color you want. If you want a Pantone color, we can tint that oil-based primer to that Pantone color. Not only that, and I'm sure you've used it for this reason, when you leave it unpainted, there's what's called open time in our industry, right? Open time refers to how long it can be left outside without top coating it. Any other primer on the market is anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days. Fine Paints of Europe oil-based primer can be left top coated for a year in exterior applications. With 2 coats, it's 2 years. So if you're that window or that door or that shutter manufacturer, you know damn well that thing isn't being made, sprayed in your shop, sent to the job site, put up, and top coated within 30 days. You just know it's not, right? Sure. So now you can offer your clients a primer that is good for an entire year when top coated with the oil-based primer, which is completely unheard of. And that's why it's probably our biggest selling SKU and it just cuts down on labor tremendously.
Yeah, first time I saw it, it blew my mind. Normal, like if you go to all the paint I ever bought before, when you go get primer, you're like, oh, I need put as much black tint in and give me a gray, right? P5. Yeah. I'll take P5 primer. And but the ability to take a wine red and out of the can, it is wine red or cherry red. And that's your primer. Right. It's out of control. It's out of control.
How many times have you done a job, or all the people that you and I both know have done jobs, and that homeowner has come home and said, Zach, you're brilliant. I love it. You weren't full of it. This stuff is better. And what do you say?
That's just the primer. It happens all the time.
Right.
I was talking to Nick Slavic earlier today, and he was spraying oil primer, actually. Your oil primer.
Tell me he liked it.
He was geeking out. I'm like exposing our secret talk. I was like whooping out loud in my shop using the paint. He was geeking out to me today, and he brought his team over, and they were all looking at it. And I was on site today looking at it, and we were talking about we like it because it has some sheen to it, right?
Yeah.
And we put it on the walls. We're doing gloss walls. We put it on the walls. Before we put primer on, we started this job. We're like, wow, these walls are in amazing shape. This is awesome. This is going to be so easy. We skimmed them once, sanded, and then we primed with black. And the sheen on that black primer looks like satin sheen, and it shows all the imperfections.
Right.
And
well, what's interesting is that sheen on the oil primer is actually where the sheen helps come from when you're doing high gloss and you're doing satin work. Because if it was a dead flat or a low luster, that same sheen wouldn't be there, right? So that sheen on that primer helps get you, that 98, that 99% angular sheen that Holland Brilliant, delivers. And that's kind of the secret sauce. I mean, we've had, how many people have you talked to at ZK Finishing School or people around the country, and they're like, oh, I don't use the primer. I don't use the primer. I mean, it happens all the time. And then eventually they use it, and they're like, I was talking to a guy today in New Jersey. He's like, I can't believe I was doing that this whole time, and I could have saved myself so much. And, hey, you found out, right? And now you know, right? People aren't spending that on primer because it's not good.
Yeah,
Right?
we don't love to just burn money. I mean, I can tell you, I was just like that when I first started with FPE. The concept of spending the kind of money, like real money, on primer,
Right.
normally primer is the cheapest part. It's like whatever. So it takes a second to wrap your head around spending more money on primer makes sense.
Right.
But once you understand it, like we're talking about, it becomes a no-brainer.
Right. Well, if you think about it, it has to do so much, right? So it has to stick to the substrate. It has to block tannins. It has to be sandable, right? And then it has to be a good substrate for anything else that you want to put over the top of it. So we spend a lot of money on our oil-based primer. Our oil-based primer is one of our most expensive products that we bring in. And I'm happy to, stroke that check because it's that good, right? And
Yeah,
we have a cult following behind it.
yeah. I think that's one of my favorite analogies when they talk about, like, I always call it like horsepower in a can. Like how much there's only, when you buy a can of paint, like this paint and primer in one concept, which is like ludicrous, right? If you have a gallon of paint, like it can only stick to things so well. It can only then last so long. Like you only have so much horsepower in the gallon. You have to pick where is it going to go.
Right.
And when you spend more money on quality ingredients, you get more horsepower.
Right.
And it can do more things.
Yeah.
I like what you said about the top coat, like thinking about the primer not as just sticking to things, but also taking top coat. And one of the big things we like the oil primer for is and a problem a lot of painters have is like a navy matte wall, right? And sheen inconsistency in that navy matte wall.
Right.
And people struggle with it all the time. But when you prime with oil primer first and you give it this nice even substrate to have paint take to, it reduces and eliminates that inconsistency of sheen. But when you don't know anything about paint, like that concept was so foreign to me until I found out about this stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, baby steps, right? I mean, it's, we all learn something every day, and, we just ask that, people try it. And, once they usually do, they're usually ruined for life. So it's, we refer to Holland Brilliant as our gateway drug.
Yes.
Right. The oil-based primer is probably, close second.
Yeah. So when did Eurolux come around then?
So Eurolux came around when we came to Fine Paints and Viginal. So they had three offerings. So it was oil-based line. So it was Holland. Then it was Eco. And then it was Eurolux in only matte, satin, and gloss. It wasn't till later, talking to people, because that we came out with a flat, right? But in the very beginning, so that was the offering. It was oil, satin, gloss. We actually still do have an oil flat. We don't sell a ton of it because of the new Eurolux flat. But we still offer a calcimine recoater, dead flat oil. And then, so that's when that whole package came together with Viginal. We were very skeptical, as was my father in the very beginning, about Eco. I mean, a water thinnable alkyd. How do you even begin to explain that to people? Right. And we come out with it and don't do really anything with it for years and years and years, because people are hesitant, and we're all creatures of habit, and it's tough to tell somebody don't use Holland Satin or Holland Brilliant and try this other new stuff and do it on your house. Right? Yeah. So people were hesitant, and we got it. And then other people started coming out with other water thinnable alkyds. All right. Advanced comes out. Right. That's the best thing that's ever happened to Fine Paints, because it made it less weird. It made it less different. It was a paint manufacturer that people knew and loved and trusted, and they weren't going to come out with something that wasn't good, right? And then when they started coming out and doing better and better with advanced, that's helped fine paints exponentially. And, you know, Eco Satin is, I mean, I don't know if we're going to double sales this year, but it's going to be close because more and more people are leaving Holland Black Satin and going all the way over to Holland Black Satin going to Eco Satin because they're getting Holland Black Satin results with a water thinnable alkyd, low VOC, soap and water cleanup, you know, everything that you're looking for from a non-oil based coating.
I love that when we talk to clients, this is an exterior grade trim paint, marine grade trim paint where you put on the out. It's the longest lasting exterior trim paint you can put on your house, and we're going to put it on the inside of your house on your trim.
Yeah.
What more can you ask for?
Right. So both flavors, both satin and gloss. It's a trim paint, and like you said, interior and exterior grade for both sheens, and it's bendable, it's flexible, it's forgiving, and people find it easier to use than an oil, right?
Yeah.
And all these window and door manufacturers that we sell to, they're all leaving Holland Black and they're all going to Eco. Every one of them is going to Eco. You know, we're doing all like the windows and doors. It's been like a 5 or 10 year project, doing all the windows and doors for a new building at Harvard. One of our window and door, or 2 or 3 of our window and door manufacturers that we sell to are doing all the windows and doors for it. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of windows, and they're all going to Eco. And one of them gives an 11-year warranty on finish. 11 years.
And what is best? So, of all the trim to put it on, sash windows are the best because sash windows are so freaking time consuming to paint.
Right.
So often we see houses where the trim gets repainted and the sashes don't.
Right.
That is a very common thing because of the cost.
Right.
So when you're going to paint your sashes and you're going to have to like paint them with the paint that lasts as long as possible.
Right.
Why wouldn't you?
You're right. And all, well, these window manufacturers, you know, they're using the best possible woods, right? So as we all know, different types of woods hold paints differently, right? So poplar, spruce, pine, right? All these quick growth woods, you know, are just, they're unfortunately they're garbage, right? What these window and door manufacturers are using are mahogany, right? They're Western redwood cedar. So it's this perfect marriage between the quality of the paint and the quality of the wood comes together, and you know you're getting something that's going to last really long. And they're encapsulating it on all 6 sides of everything. You know, they're spraying it 2 or 3 coats of primer and then 2 or 3 coats of top coat. And you know, sometimes it doesn't look like some of the finishes that you know our community puts out, but they don't really care. They want a certain mill thickness. And it's not like a kitchen cabinet. Nobody's coming up close and personal to that exterior window or door. I mean, it still looks amazing, but they're just looking for mill thickness when you're producing something that you want to last literally for the next 20 years.
It's awesome because that's what brought me to Fine Paints of Europe originally. I am a coatings nerd, and we found this wood preservative that was treating wood so paint wouldn't peel. And so my limiting factor was color retention in paint. And there are some big domestic paint manufacturers with they're high-end paints, and I've experienced them fading pretty quickly. So I was looking to find something that would last. And through my homework, that's how I found Fine Paints of Europe.
Right.
And then I went down a whole rabbit hole, and now, you know, the rest is history. But if you're going to spend more money on paint, I think it's funny. It's harder. Sometimes it's harder for us to sell, but the most logical reason to spend more money on paint is it's going to last longer, and especially on an exterior. So it blows my mind that more homes are not painted with Eco because it's just a cost-effective way of painting your house.
Well, I mean, my buddy and our mutual friend, good friend, John Shear, I mean, he did, I think like 8 or 9 years ago, he did 11 houses in Eco. And he took me around 2 or 3 years ago to a house that he did 11 years ago, and it looks like it was done last summer.
Yeah.
And he's going to make a big push this year and getting back into eco on exterior body paint. You know, and also like Shoreline, Chris Polidoro, we did his entire masonry office in eco gloss, and you know, it still looks amazing. So it's
yeah.
But you're right.
It's one of those things you want to go do it and not have to go do it again. Most of the time, people want to paint their house and they don't want to have to think about painting it again.
Right.
And so,
well, I mean, that's where things come into the economics of painting, right? So in the world that you and I operate in, we shoot for, you know, the top 10% of clients, right? I mean, let's call a spade, right? You know, what's the average, you know, cost of a house that you paint?
Yeah, they're upwards of $1 million.
Yeah. $1 million, right? So where I'm going with this is people need to understand that 85 to 99.9% of the cost of painting isn't me, it's the applicator, right? Yeah. You and I know painters today that if they change the product that they were going to use, instead of fine paints, they're going to go to some other coating, it wouldn't affect the cost of the job 1/2 of 1%.
Nope.
Right? So I guess what I'm getting at was, why in a million years would you care what the paint cost, right? When you're doing a door for $4,000 to $8,000 and ZK had to drop $55 on a quart of paint, I don't want to hear your problems. Right?
It's hilarious.
Right? You know, and now what happens, right? So now you don't use fine paints, and now the door doesn't look the same, right? And now nobody's stopping and asking what's on the door, right? And it changes everything that we're doing. So that's why I'm always telling people, like, people's like, I can't sell it. I'm like, man, you're in Fairfield County, or you're in St. George's County. These are literally the wealthiest. You're on Nantucket. You're in San Francisco. You're in Atlanta. These are literally the wealthiest people on the planet. My advice to you is just start using the paint. Don't try to sell them on anything, right? I'm a very good painter. That's why I'm here. I'm probably more than anybody else in my neighborhood. And this is how I roll. These are the paints I use because I want my job to look better, right? At the end of the day, that's your name. That's everything. That's why they hired you, right? And you know, as I beat it to the heads of people at certification, you cannot do exceptional painting with paint that was never made to be exceptional in the first place, right? You cannot do this level of painting that was manufactured to be here, right? The biggest differentiator in painting, other than the skill of, you know, your craftsmen like you and Philip and, right, the rest of your team, you know, I liken it to, you know, other guys like, you know, Jessica Allred, Ken Marshall, you know, who else? Jack Andrews, right? Da Vinci Painting, John Shear. I mean, those guys, Peter Bokamp, right? I just left a job. I saw a job that he was painting today. Those guys not using this paint is like Leonardo da Vinci using finger paint. It is so beneath it. It's so beneath you not to use this product.
Yeah.
So because
can you? Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, like, everything that you've worked and you strived for, you have blood, sweat, and tears building your business, right? And the one thing that you're gonna change, the biggest differentiator, and you're not gonna use this, right? So that's my advice to people. It's like, what are you doing? Just use the paint. Right? Yeah. You know a lot more about paint than your homeowner does. Spend 5 minutes, but just use it. Right?
Yeah. And to that point, I think, and let's get into this a little bit, but I think so often we live in America where the paint, if you go into any domestic paint store, there is 9 levels of paint that are $5 more and $5 more, $5 more, $5 more, right? Those paints are all being reverse engineered to reach that price point. And when we clients, people too often are thinking about the price of a gallon of paint. And it's such an easy like barometer, I guess, for people to wrap their heads around. But it's a false one because 85% of the job is labor, like we've talked about. So what is it like? How is fine paints designed versus the domestic paint, and what, like, why is that better?
All right, so I think that paint in this country is made backwards, and what I mean by that is this: a new product is going to get launched. Somebody's going to go to a potential painter and they're going to say, and the painter's going to say, man, if I had a latex flat that could sell for $43.99 to $47, I could kill it with that product. Now that person at that paint store is going to go back to his sales rep. The sales rep is going to go back to his boss at XYZ manufacturer. And then they're going to start thinking, boy, we could probably grab a certain market share if we could produce that product at $43.99 to $49. Then they're going to think backwards to what they can actually afford as far as ingredients, raw materials, right, to make the paint, right? That's the way paints are made here, right? They're made to fit in a certain price and quality point. That's just the way it is. Now, take that same can of $43.99 to $45 can of paint. Now, put into effect everything that needs to happen at that manufacturing level, right? So you have salaries, insurance, Social Security insurance, you have the can, you have labeling, you have legal, you have the CEO's golden parachute, you have the pallets, you have the cars, you have the gas cards, you have salaries. How much do you think is actually left to put in the can of paint?
And you have the person who walks in off the street pays $60 a gallon, and the contractor gets it for $37 or $23.
Right. So now it's no longer a $45 can of paint. After Zach Kenney gets his discount because he's not paying MSRP, right? I mean, it's I don't want to I don't want to say anything I shouldn't say.
So how does fine paints get to their
so
price?
we approach it a bit differently. All right. So you may come to me or John Shear or somebody may say, like, just like case in point, this new primer that we just came out with. I'll give a big shout out to Lou Millinghausen because he was one of the people, right? And Chris, but like, man, I wish we had a latex form of what you're doing with your oil. So 2 years ago, working with a manufacturer, like, all right, so imagine if we had everything that people know and love and trust about Fine Paints of Europe oil-based primer now in a latex form. And nothing happens quickly in the paint manufacturing world. All right. I mean, it's really slow, especially when you're working with the Dutch because they're so careful, right? They don't just bang out products to see if it, and see what's going to shake out and see what works, right? And they said, we think we have something for you. And I brought in a couple hundred liters. I'm sure you got one. And I sent them out to dealers. I sent them out to painters, everyone I know and I trust in the industry. And I said, let me know what you think, and to a man, everyone was like, this is awesome. And to date, we've brought in, I think, 3 containers of it and I'm out. I have none of it. I have a container arriving. I have a container arriving of the new Uni Eurolux primer, arriving hopefully this week.
So you're saying that you didn't start with a price point in mind first?
I could care less.
First engineer your paint?
I could care less what it costs. Now that's not necessarily true. I mean, there is a certain, like, how much am I going to sell of this when it costs that? right? I mean, it does come into play. But I knew that now that's selling for $135 for a 5 liter. But, you know, I knew that everyone was absolutely going to love it. And I trusted everyone's input. And I had 100% of it sold on the first 2 orders of it coming in from the Netherlands. I have another, I think I have like 600 or 800 fives coming in this week, and half of that's already sold. And John Shear has already bought 250 of them, the one coming in next month. So people are obviously loving it. And at the end of the day, it's making people money, right? I mean, they're not buying it because they love John Lahey, right? They're buying it because now think about what it's doing for you, right? So now you have a latex primer. You could tint to a Pantone color, put on a wall, and put whatever you want over the top of it. You want to put Eurolux, you want to put Eco, you want to put Holland Lac, you can do that over this product. If you want to put somebody else's product over it, guess what? At the end of the day, I'm still selling primer, right? So I always wanted a product that was more of anybody can use it. You don't have to be a big fancy painter, right? You can be an everyday house painter doing really nice work. And this primer will make you that much more money, because now you can put on multiple coats of primer in the same day, tinted to the finished color, and put whatever you want over the top of it.
I mean, just thinking about a red, we did that sample wall where we rolled out wine red and one coat coverage with primer, like full coverage.
Yeah.
So even I like that, because now even if the guy's like, look, man, I'm applying Promar 200, but I have to go red. All right. Now people in situations where they aren't using the full line, the primer still makes sense because it saves you how many coats?
I know. And the other thing is, look, I mean, I'm very aware of there's jobs that you can't use fine paints because there's a hard spec, right? And, you know, there's certain painters out there that we know and love that are going to be like, you know what, this is the paint I use. Sorry. But not everybody's like that, right? So I'm very aware that, you know, not every job is for fine paints, right? So, but how often is a primer spec'd? Never, right? So now, even when you have to use somebody else's product, you can still use that primer. You can help support me, you can help support the brand, help support our fraternity, and also make yourself some, God forbid, make yourself some money, right? Because now you're turning that job over that much faster.
So how did 5 liters come about? Because that was a big change in wall paint for me, cost-wise, and for everyone cost-wise. How did that happen?
All right, so shortly after my dad dies in 2011, I had Eurolux Matte, Eurolux Satin, and Eurolux Gloss. I approached people and I said, what do I need to do to really get into the world of selling wall paint, right? I mean, everybody loves the trim, but in our world, you sell 5 gallons of wall and ceiling paint to 1 a trim. Now, what do you think I'd rather be, the 5 or the 1? I'd rather be the 5, right? So I went to people I trust and I care about, and I said, what do I need to do this? And they all said the same thing. Bigger can, better price. Bigger can, better price. So I said, fine. I doubled the size of the can, and I slashed the price, right? So now, basically you're getting Eurolux Matte and Flat for literally the same price as what you get for a good quality domestic can of paint. Just covers and looks and feels way better.
The feel. So people, like, the number one thing, if you want to get into fine paints, that's a question we'll get into later. But we can talk about it now. How you get into fine paints. The easiest thing to do, switch out your wall paint tomorrow. And if you're worried about it, make a sample board, bring it to a client, have them touch it, and then have them touch the walls in their house. And I love the matte because it feels like porcelain. It's so smooth. There's no fillers. The light reflects off of it. The room glows because of how high quality the paint is. And now you go feel a Eurolux wall versus any other domestic wall paint. It's like sandpaper and porcelain.
Yep. And that's where all that washability and durability, comes from. It's not, you can't get that from a wide open porous coating, right? You can't do it. So when you have a nice tight film, it's able to be, washed and scrubbed and maintained, and yeah, I mean, it's an entire, and that was a huge game changer for us, right? So when I came out with the fives, it's, I mean, there's really no excuse, as far as I'm concerned, why not to use that product. I'm obviously biased, but I don't understand, and don't ask me to.
So how do they make $30 a gallon wall paint? What are they doing to the paint?
The Dutch?
No. So if I go to a domestic manufacturer and I buy $30 a gallon wall paint, right, what's the difference between that and Eurolux?
Right. It's filled with 30, 40, 50% chalk, calcium carbonate. Right? Covers great. Easy, super easy to apply. But yeah, I mean, it's laden with fillers and extenders and things that make it less expensive. And also it makes it feel heavy. So you think you're getting like a really good product. The stir stick stands straight up and down. You're like, man, this stuff must be awesome. And in reality, it's the exact opposite, right?
Yeah, I think it's crazy that when you think of thinning the paint, you think of it being thinner, like runnier.
Right.
But you can also thin paint by adding a bunch of inert fillers that keep it thick, but dilute diluting the paint is a better term for it.
Right.
And then, like you said, the film tightness, when you have a paint that's full of diluted paint, that's full of clay is porous, and porous surfaces absorb light, and they're not as easy to clean. And so I always tell clients, so if we painted your walls with Eurolux matte in the same color as a domestic cheaper paint, the room is going to glow that color because the light's reflecting off of it and it's not dying in the pores. So on so many levels, your wall paint is such an easy sell because it doesn't cost me more money. And I have one client who makes all her friends rub their cheeks on her walls because it's so smooth.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, like in some of our direct sales where we don't have dealers, right? So that's 20% of the business at Fine Paints is done direct. So people are like, oh, you don't know what we go through. I'm like, we're very aware of what you go through. So sometimes we'll have painters that are saying, look, the homeowner is going to use your paint in this area, and in this area, but it's just straight up, it's not in the budget to do everywhere in the house. So Emmett or Charlie, guys that I work with at Fine Paints, they'll say, that's fine. And they're like, where do you want to use our stuff? And then, hand to God, every time they will call back months later and say, we can't do it. We literally have to repaint those areas we didn't and go ahead and literally have it repainted because the look and the feel is so different than anything else out there. So they'll literally circle all the way back around and come use Fine Paints.
Yeah, it's one thing if you want to value engineer a paint job, we always say we can do it, but we're going to do it on aesthetics. We're going to do it on less prep. Right. We're not going to do it on quality of the paint we're applying.
Right.
We can go crazy and do insane amounts of prep and get you a mirror finish. But if you want to dial back the price, we're going to dial back the prep work, not the quality of the paint.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's an easier way for people to wrap their heads around this is it doesn't have to cost that much more. Oftentimes I just say, well, now based off this amazing horsepower in this gallon, sometimes it can warrant more prep work. So then it can get more expensive.
Right.
But, I think the paint is sort of just a no-brainer. Speaking of that, let's talk about famous projects.
Okay.
Where is Fine Paints?
Let's see. Well, I make it a promise to not mention names. Because look, I mean, our clients do deserve, and your clients do deserve a certain level of, anonymity. All all celebrities. But the craziest stuff that we see aren't the celebrities. It's venture capital, banker, finance guys. Now, those names don't mean anything to me. I wouldn't know one banker over another banker's name. But the craziest stuff that we see at Fine Paints isn't, celebrities or athletes or anything like that. It's the venture capital guys are just.
What about like public projects?
All right.
Like,
well,
people would know.
Okay. Well, Martha Stewart, that is something that's out there in the public space. She's been a huge supporter of Fine Paints. We're actually one of the things that helps kick off Fine Paints. We're in 91 when she launched Martha Stewart Living. I think it was 90 or 91. We had 18 pages in her first magazine ever, and that was the Colors of the Garden collection. One of our certified painters still works for her today. Does all of her places. But there's a success story. We also got the Helmsley Estate in Westchester for a certified painter. Your everyday normal 7-figure paint job. Certified guy, a friend of mine. But we've done we do high-end stuff, man.
What about Mount Vernon? Tell me about Mount Vernon.
All right. Well, thank you. So the father of our country, they were using home of George Washington, for all of you who don't know what that is. But they came to us probably 12 or 13 years ago, and it's a big house, right? But it's very tight. And they have 1 million visitors a year go through the house. They were literally repainting some of the interior trim once a month. And they came to my dad and they're like, look, there's got to be another option. Like this, there's got to be something else. Up to that point, we've done a lot of other historical projects. And said, like, we're going to give this a try. And we've been supplying Mount Vernon paint since then. So inside and out, every square inch of George Washington's home is painted with Fine Paints. As far as I'm concerned, that is the most prestigious paint job in the United States.
Absolutely.
There's not another paint manufacturer that would not give them the paint to say it's on Mount Vernon, and they buy Fine Paints at a substantial discount, but they still buy it, right?
Mic drop.
And, yeah, and it's been it's a wonderful place, and they're just wonderful people to be affiliated with, just aces of human beings.
Yeah, and they have a very discerning group of people over there working at, as historians and preservationists at Mount Vernon. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're constantly doing digs on campus, and so when they don't just paint something, right? They're stripping it, and they're seeing what was used, what colors were used, and the process, and what was the makeup of those coatings. And so when you go down there and you visit them and they're doing paint work, it's just it's absolutely awesome. It's awesome to see. And they work with serious people.
So you travel all over the country, you see amazing painters. Could you give me?
You're not going to ask me who the best one is, are you?
Well, I already know the answer to that one. Could you give me like a profile of what is a profile of an awesome painter in your experience? What are the characteristics of the top painters?
Right. I mean, I could really care how big you are, right? I mean, we're a tiny company. Our allegiance is to the people that show allegiance to Fine Paints and their support of the brand. But you're right. I mean, there is a certain type of person that is a Fine Paints of Europe client when they're a painter. I'd say willingness to learn and to get better, enthusiastic about our industry, which not everybody is. Some people have just been in it too long and just are totally disenfranchised with our industry. But I don't want to say young, because our clients run the gamut, but just people that want something more, right? And now with the advent of like social media, and they see people like you, and they see people like, everyone that's posting, and they're like, I want some of that, right? I want to energize my crew again. I want to do different work. I want to be more proud. But I'll tell you, the biggest thing that you can do as a small business owner is to think of yourself as a salesperson. If you want to think of yourself as just a painter, you're really doing yourself a huge disservice, right? If we'll call success whatever you want to deem success, but if you're just talking about monetarily, the most successful people I know in this industry, they're all salespeople, right? Every one of them, right? Yeah. Go meet Mike Foley at Da Vinci Painting, right? Go meet John. Go meet any of them, right? So they're going to be able to explain to you the processes that they use, the why, the how, and they're going to tell you most likely why they want to use fine paints, and they're going to be able to close.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the difference. Can you sell? Right. And not everybody can. Not everybody's comfortable with sales. Right.
And not everyone has studied it and has prioritized it. That's why we teach a class at ZK Finishing School on sales and marketing.
Right.
Because for a long time, I thought if I just did amazing paint jobs in a vacuum in a corner of the world, everyone would find out about me. I would sell tons of paint jobs and I'd be rich. But the unfortunate reality,
you mean it doesn't work that way?
No. Good paint jobs are not enough. I'm sorry, folks. I hate to break it to you, but good paint jobs are not enough to find real success in this business.
Right, because you need to worry about the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's why, people are always like, why do you have such a strong allegiance with these group of amazing painters? It's because they're leveraging my paint and their skills and their ability and their drive and their salesmanship to get the next job, to get a better job, to make more money, to get their phone to ring. It's not because, I'm a nice guy and I sell shiny paint. They're using it to advance who they are as craftspeople.
And the most important thing is to have options.
Right.
People say, "Oh, I'm busy." Well, I don't care. Being busy is not a marker of success, because I could be busy tomorrow. I could book my next 10 years if I lowered my labor rates to $20 an hour.
Right.
Like, it's how do we get better clients? Well, you have to have options.
Right.
And it's sales and marketing that gives you options. And I love it. That's a great point.
Yeah.
You missed one point, though.
What's that?
They all use fine paints of Europe.
I don't know what the common denominator is.